Hi, this is Jim Montague, Executive Editor of Control Magazine and ControlGlobal.com, and this is the latest in our Control Amplified podcast series. In these recordings, we talk with expert sources about process control and automation topics and try to get beyond our print and online coverage to explore some of the underlying issues impacting users, system integrators, suppliers, and other people and organizations in these industries. For our 8th podcast, we're talking to Sam Hoff, CEO of Patti Engineering, a CSIA-certified system integrator in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Sam has given us the system integrator's perspective, experience, advice, and in connection with a bunch of process control and automation topics in recent years, including cybersecurity a couple of years ago, and most recently with the workforce development cover article in the September issue of Control Magazine. These days, many of what used to be separate topics are now coalescing around digitalization and the industrial Internet of Things, so we're going to talk about that, though more than likely we'll lapse into some of the others as well. Okay, Sam, sorry for the usual preamble, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, no problem, Jim. Happy to be here, and I'd just like to add, I do sit in Auburn Hills, Michigan, but we also have offices in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Austin, Texas.
Okay, so first off, how do you and your colleagues, both in Michigan and the other offices, how are you guys seeing IIoT and digitalization unfolding lately? What are the latest big milestones?
So the whole IIoT, Industry 4.0 digitalization, I think it's been a lot of talk and a lot of theoretical over the last 10 years, basically. I think just in the last year or two, though, you're seeing where it's going from theoretical to practical, and you're seeing real-world applications of digitalization and seeing the benefits and seeing proof of values and people really starting to say, what can I do with IIoT? What can I do with digitalization? How can this affect my throughput, my quality, and stuff like that? So yeah. I think it's gone from the boardroom to the plant floor at this point.
Right. Is there any characteristics that, things that are common to IIoT applications? Any, typical equipment they use?
The whole plan with IIoT is you really need to decide up front what you're going to collect, what data you're going to collect, where you're going to store the data, and how, in particular, you're going to analyze the data. The whole a lot of the benefits of IIoT are the analytics of the data coming off your plant floor. I mean, it's interesting. You go into a lot of these facilities and they're very data rich, but they don't do a whole lot with the data because, quite honestly, the people that are running the facility don't have time to take a look and all the data and see what it's telling them.
So given that being the case, how is digitalization and IIoT impacting system integrators like yourself, and then what types of technologies and applications and projects are impacted by that?
So I think it's as integrators, we're figuring out ways to get closer to the end users and being able to use the data and the information coming off their plant floors to help give them the analytics to help them perform better. And the digitalization to perform better. I can tell you, these systems get more and more complicated all the time, and there's to ask somebody on a manufacturing floor to maintain and be an expert on all these disparate systems is really asking a lot of somebody.
Yeah. Is there any particular projects that Patti Engineering has done that you could talk about where IIoT and digitalization were used? And, if so, how were they carried out? And was using IIoT an improvement over, former ways of doing it?
Sure, absolutely. We have a couple different projects we're doing right now. One is doing analytics off of parallel CNC machines to measure OEE, to look at data, to see predictive on tool wear. I mean, a lot of times, if you take a look at tooling that's sold with a CNC machine, maybe the manufacturer says it's good for 20,000 hits. But depending on how you use that tool, it could be good for 10,000 hits. It could be good for 50,000 hits. It's kind of like your tires on your car. And, the manufacturer says, okay, your tires are good for 30,000 miles. Well, depending on your driving habits, they could be good for 15,000 or they could be good for 50,000. And what you don't do with your tires is you look at them, right? And you see how they're performing and that kind of stuff, and you replace them when the tread gets low. Well, it's tough to really look at a tool and tell exactly when it's getting dull or when it needs to be replaced. But through analytics, we can kind of tell that.
Right. And so the old way of, people used to gather, tire information or OEE in the past, but I guess it was more cumbersome. There was, programming might have been more difficult. So digitalization and IIoT, as I understand it, is making some of these tasks easier. And I assume it's getting easier for you guys too, right?
Yeah. And a lot has to be done as far as how you're going to take the data. Like it's, because of communication rates and all, you may have to have an edge device to do some pre-processing and all, and then take the data to the cloud or some data lake or something like that. But the design and the and how you're going to lay out the data and planning on it upfront is very important to do.
Yeah. Is there any particular tools, data laking or data gathering or analyzing methods that you guys have found to be preferable?
So there's a lot of AI type systems on the market. There's a lot of, we're a big Siemens partner with Siemens MindSphere. There's a lot of analytics and AI tools that are actually built into the MindSphere platform, which is nice. And that kind of stuff.
Cool. All right. Some sources report that users can, deploy like a little IIoT box or, gateway and just send data right to the cloud and skip the traditional PLC DCS structure entirely. And so those, former controllers and systems might, become somewhat obsolete in the future. Is there any truth to that idea? And, if so, how much and why?
Much like your phone is a gateway to the internet, I don't ever see some type of controls device at the machine level going away. You're going to need to have the real world and the pretty much instant control of I/O happening at the machine level. Will the devices in the future become a little bit more dumb because some of the analytics and all can be done in the cloud? Yes, absolutely. But I see it kind of morphing over time, but I don't see it going away.
In covering IIoT and digitalization in some of the stories in Control Magazine, we've noticed that they tie together many formerly separate disciplines, such as cybersecurity to protect IIoT's networking. What are some former silos that digitalization and IIoT bring together, and how does that happen?
Oh, it's amazing. The silos that have to break down within our company and even within our clients. For instance, the old way of designing lines or designing manufacturing systems is a company like a large line builder like a canal, let's say. They'll use a simulation tool to kind of lay out the mechanical design and all that stuff, or and how the part's going to process and all, and then the MEs would go and design all the mechanics of the system. How big a steel do we need, how big a load, how big a servo drive, and then the controls engineer would make everything work. Well, now, okay, that simulation is coming together, and you can do a lot of that design in the simulation. And now you can even use the simulation, so that's the basis of your system. And as the controls engineers writing their code, they can test their code in the simulation, which, in the whole virtual commissioning aspect of the simulation software is really exciting. I'll give you a little story, Jim. We had a project last year for one of our really good clients, and it took them 6 months to build up 1 week of stock to shut down and upgrade this line that we were going to do for them. And we were the only company that could ensure them that they'd only be down for a week. The other two competitors that were bidding against us said they'd need to shut down the system for 4 weeks. So the reason we were able to accomplish that 1 week downtime and switchover was because we had tested every line of code through virtual commissioning and simulation before we ever hit the plant floor.
So, and this is kind of goes into the digital twin concept as well, which is another way of, like an operational simulation.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And now what do you do when the system's running? Well,
right. Yeah, it isn't just for designing and setting up. It, you use the simulation for operations, just as you guys used it to multitask as the project was being put together, right?
Yes, sir.
Wow, man, it's a brave new world here. And as we found out with the workforce story in September, there's plenty of new skills that IIoT and digitalization are going to require. It seems like rookies, veterans, and everyone in between is going to need training. So, what do you think they need to learn?
Right. Yeah. And, we were talking, I was talking with another client, and but by doing the digitalization, and doing the digital twin and the simulation and all, the mechanical engineer designed something, and now the controls engineer says, you realize what you designed mechanically, I can't control.
Right.
And now they're communicating a lot earlier, so instead of building the system and the controls engineer at that point saying, I can't control this, we have to make some changes, they make it before anything is ever built. They make the changes. But the silos between the IEs, the MEs, and the EEs are all breaking down because they have to communicate more often and earlier in the process.
Yeah, and that's good because you might not find out about a conflict like that until the acceptance test, in previous years. So that's really good, right?
Yep.
And then is there any like mental or psychological stress that goes along with that? Being joined at the hip sooner? Is there any downside to that?
Or maybe it's just beneficial to be. Maybe it's less stressful to find out the bad news sooner.
It's a different way of working, and it's maybe you got to get a little bit more outside of your comfort zone, and engineers have a tendency to be a little introverted.
Right.
So so there's a little bit of uncomfortableness that way.
Yeah. But they must get, used to it with practice, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah, cool. All right. So then, one of the things that we've been kind of a little concerned about is once IIoT and digitalization really get going, that just like things like Amazon Web Service are just going to eat everything. And, if not, if so, why is that going to happen? Or maybe if not, why not?
Amazon Web Services, they certainly have a great cloud-based storage system, and like I know the Siemens MindSphere on the back end, they're partnered with AWS, right?
Right.
So I think AWS is certainly going to be a big player, and I think one of the things that you're seeing is like Amazon and Google and Microsoft and all are getting closer to manufacturing, right? They've kind of discovered manufacturing and what they can do as far as the data and all. So I think they're going to be a force in the future without a doubt. So.
Right, but they won't replace. I mean, like with the earlier question about is IIoT going to take over from controllers, or there's always the feeling like one's going to win and one's going to lose, and somebody's going to go take over and somebody's going to go away. And it really is, they kind of go along. A lot of these things just go along together. Amazon Web Services will have its place, and it may be a large piece of the pie. But then, all of the, or many of the existing ways of doing things, you can't use the cloud everywhere. You may need to be on the edge. So a lot of these things, it's not like one thing will replace the others. A lot of times they'll just go along into the future, and like TV was going to replace radio and movies, and they just can all continue together. So is that you think that'll happen with what we're looking at now?
Yeah, I kind of agree.
All right. Well, listen, this has been a good conversation. I'm sorry to interject so much, but thanks for the input, and thanks for cluing us in today about some of these things.
Hey, Jim, it's been my pleasure.
Okay. All right. As our sign off, this has been another Control Amplified podcast. I'm Jim Montague. Thanks for listening. And please remember that Control Amplified podcasts are available on most of the podcasting apps, such as the iTunes Store and Google Play. And you can also go to Control Magazine's YouTube channel for the podcasts. And you can also listen anytime at controlglobal.com, of course. All right. Thanks a bunch, everybody.